Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I am Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we've made it to the end of another book. You did it. You were in the valley, and all of a sudden the denouement came into fruition, and you conquered it. And now we know the answer to, well, what about that evil? So we know that, according to the greater glory theodicy, is that God is using evil for his glory, and there are things that God is able to do because of his glory. One of those things is to show his judgment, his mercy. Those are things that you can't demonstrate without evil. You can tell your creation, I'm a great judge. I'm a perfect judge. And when people go, judge what? Because we live in a land of bliss and we just believe God. Yeah, okay. But the demonstration of that judgment is there. And then also mercy. How do you tell an unfallen world what mercy is when there's nothing to be merciful towards? And so that's one of the reasons that our friend of the show, Scott Christensen, has written this book to kind of show the deficiencies of kind of the other models, free will being kind of the main one. It's the one that we kind of like because it speaks to us. It puts us in the center of the story. And Scott Christensen says, no, wait. We're looking at the wrong person in the photo. That's nice for the kids, but we need to know where we came from and who's the picture for. What are we taking the picture for? And ultimately, because we're Christians, we're Christ-centered, we're followers of Christ. He is ultimately the one that we put at the center of it. So now we have to ask, well, how now should we live in the world of evil? As Francis Schaeffer would say, how should we now live? Yeah. And so that's what this final chapter, chapter 17, the grace and glory effect, kind of demonstrates. And we'll figure out how many episodes this takes, but we're not going to be able to cover everything. This is one of the longer chapters as well. But it does so, surprisingly, in storytelling form, because we've covered storytelling a number of times here. So that's where we're going to start here. So he starts off by saying that pain is inescapable part of our world, but as the inexorable forces of our post-Christian zeitgeist seeks to expel God from our collective conscious, the story that the world tries to tell us becomes hollow and hopeless, leaving us lost and unable to cope with the obstinate reality of pain. And so in the world of, ever-changing evolution, where things must die, they have to die, the strongest survive, those best suited for the environment, and it's not even towards a conception of truth, but only of survivability, as we've covered with Mitch Stokes' book, How to Be an Atheist. There's no basis for what we have for an objective truth standard. We have our chemicals firing, our synapses in the best suited for the environment until the environment changes. Right. Wipes us out, and then new truth patterns come about. And so when
pain is just part of the deal.
Yeah,
right?
It's just it's in subjective terms, it's a good thing. The universe views pain and death as a good thing, and we look at things like school shootings or floods or volcanoes or asteroids heading towards Earth or species wiped out or pollution as these things that are painful in an immoral way. But how do we say, other than it's icky or it's I don't like it, how can we ever say anything is bad or evil? There are just degrees of
it's just stuff that happens.
Things that happens, right? Yeah. So we can make no sense of it in a godless worldview. And so we do everything we can to push the ugly reality out of sight. We suppress the truth of God. I believe that's somewhere in the Romans. In fact, it's Romans 1. So, of course, we're going to be always pushing back to that because that's what we want to see. And we see in our world today, especially with just all the proclivities out there, is that religious worship is evident. I mean, the past number of years have shown things replace the worship of God for things that you can't question. The dogmatic sayings that you must take from the priests, that they have the guns now, But back in the 1200s, it was the ugly church that that we speak out against now. But it's the scientist, it's the politician, it's the news commentator that you can't speak out against, right, or you're silenced, because
they're the new priest. Right?
It's going against the religious dogma.
Yeah,
and so all men must worship is what Romans 1 tells us, and we're replacing things that keep failing us because we don't have the correct godly image that provides us this standard of a grounded, objective worldview that we are centering our response to the question, well, what about evil?
Yeah. And so this chapter, as you have started here, is called the Grace and Glory Effect. And so, Christensen, given, that pain is ubiquitous, right, all over the creation, and he says, for those who are paying a close attention, against all the odds and in distinction to all its competitors, the Bible comes along and dares to tell a different story about pain and what it's all about, right? He says that story doesn't ignore the pain, the tragedy, but rather transforms it into a brilliant comedy of indomitable quality. And so those who embrace this remarkable story find their own lives radically transformed. And that's what he's going to talk about here, how this part of what God is doing is not only showing his glory, but allowing us to transform our lives as well, right?
So the transformation wrought by Christ that especially marks the lives of the beleaguered believers living in the trenches of this tragic world proves to be one of the greatest, though unexpected, apologetics for Christianity. In fact, what about evil? Exactly. What about that evil? That's a jumping off point that we can make. That's one of the things that when we talked about the tactics book, that's one of the pebbles we can put in the shoe and say, whoa, what are you talking about? Why is evil, however you define it there, first of all, define it, and second of all, why is it an incorrect thing to have in this world? Why should we, other than we don't like pain, why is it something that we shouldn't do? The person at the gym is experiencing pain and suffering and hardship and not eating the chocolate cake, which is evil. It's evil. But through that,
the not eating of it is
right,
evil.
Yeah. Even if it's devil food cake. But through that, breaking down of muscle and then building it up to become stronger. It's one of the formations, and it's one of the things that the Apostle Paul tells us that he's done. He's run the race. He's boxed himself. He's beaten his own body. For what purpose? So that his life can be stronger in his walk of faith. And so when he faces things like beatings and shipwrecks and poisoning and viper bites that he throws into the fire and people trying to put him up as being a god or a person to listen to above anybody else surrounding him, he knows that those hardships have kind of molded him into having this testimony that he points away from himself, but then points back to Christ there. So it involves a display of weakness, humility, unearthly love, compassion, perseverance under trial, and forgiveness of vile offenders. It's what Larry Taunton calls the grace effect.
Good. So what is this transforming grace and this grace effect all about? Well, he says the distinguishing measure of Christianity's claim to truth lies in its unprecedented, unexpected, undeserved, and transformative power of the gospel in the lives of lowly sinners, right? That's what it's all about. Eleanor Stump describes how prolonged evil and suffering, notice, produces a longing for goodness and redemption that only such desperate conditions can evoke, right? So this suffering and evil and that sort of thing, we know, it seems instinctively, that there's something better. And so it produces a longing for that, right? A desperation for that, right? And so that's part of this transforming grace that he wants us to see here.
Right. So when people are enslaved to sin and bitterness, when they are used to pain and disillusionment, and then unexpectedly the resplendent beams of blessing and redemption invade their cold, gray hovel, it sends shockwaves through every room. It's this renewing. It's more than a feeling. It's getting the cobwebs. It's the spring cleaning. You knock out all the stuff. You get rid of the junk, and it's like you have a new home that you're looking at. It arrests them, chokes them, and releases all the tension that holds back the pain. It forces all the pent-up emotions that lay dormant to rise to the surface and come alive. Darkness gives birth to hope. Stump argues that tears of joy are always connected to a suffering.
Good. All right, so the next section he has entitled Grace Overcoming Evil. And he begins this by saying that the Apostle Paul issues a simple but extraordinary command in Romans 12:14. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Right, so that's...
But eye for an eye.
Yeah. So it's simple but extraordinary. True, right? So Thomas Schindler calls this one of the most revolutionary statements in the New Testament, he tells us. Its ubiquitous deployment in the lives of the early Christians help explain why Christianity forever changed the world that we live in. Yet how have Christians been consistently enabled to live this way, he asks? Well, the only explanation is found in grace, God's grace, right? God enables us. He allows us. He strengthens us. He encourages us. He gives us the ability to live through through these types of situations. He tells us that the transforming grace that saves sinners is the same grace that sanctifies them. Grace is invested with a preternatural, indeed an otherworldly divine power that enables believers to endure suffering and to conquer any evil set before them. So God's grace, right? Somebody has said, and I'm sure you've heard this before, God's grace is God's riches at Christ's expense, right? Grace.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how we can share. It's that God takes the worst parts of me for himself, and then gives me the best parts of himself to change me, to clean out the temple and to rip the veil, and then I'm able to stand, with God as a son or daughter of God. It's what Genesis 3, all throughout the Old Testament, points towards. The cross exemplifies, and then the church extols. It declares this is the culmination of human history. This is the glory that we've experienced. And so it's in the suffering of Christ and the suffering of our own nature that we experience the joy, and almost with a unbalanced view is that when we experience this type of joy, the pain that we experienced seems to almost flip, and we kind of look back and we can see the reasons for walking in that for the period of time that we did.
Yeah.
All right, so anyone who has come to Christ under the promise that life will be peaches and cream has been sold a bill of goods.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way,
yeah,
right?
Right. Yep. You believe, and then you can, walk through the fire literally.
Yeah.
And well, no, I mean, look at the early church, and like the earliest church. So Christ goes in the heavens. I'll be back. Angels say, "What are you doing here? Go." You got the Great Commission, go. Yeah. And what happens? Well, 100 people go and wait for the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit comes, and then it expands. But it expands in what? It expands into a nation that is conquered by Romans, that is persecuting them on behalf of the Romans are persecuting on behalf of the Jewish state. The Jewish state rebels, and then literally all hell breaks loose on the nation of Jerusalem. Temples burnt down, The warning in Hebrews of you can't go back to the temple are even more told. You can't go back to the temple because not one brick is laid upon another, and it's all burnt down. It's what Jesus
said
predicted
would do. Yeah, would happen rather. Right. Yeah.
But unfortunately, or fortunately for us, the temple is built in the hearts of those 100 people and then 1,000, and they do what? They go out into the world. So through that suffering, grace abounds. And what do we see? We see there's no taking up arms. There's no I am Spartacus. There's no I'm being persecuted, so let's band together and get our sabers and
throw off the shackles and fight. And
you have nothing to lose but your change. No, it's people see the Christians burning in Nero's garden. They're being eaten by lions. They're forgiving their enemies. And what's happening? Well, it's not going away. I keep rubbing the oil spot and it keeps growing bigger. This shouldn't be happening. Unlike certain other religions that conquered by the sword or had the fruitless ability to not be persecuted, Christianity experienced great growth in that time period. And I'm not saying we should ever return to that.
And we might even say as a result of the persecution. Right? Yeah.
I mean, you see faith in action in that point. Something bad is happening, but we're looking towards the culmination of human history when Christ will come again, and the return of not the garden, but a better garden that is set up for us, where we have direct relational communication with the God that saves us. Mm-hmm. So once we come to Christ, the battle has only just begun.
Right.
But we are already assured victory even before the landing craft spills us out onto the beachhead. The superior power the Holy Spirit presents with us on D-Day enables us to press forward off the beaches towards final destination, where the V-Day banners will wave proudly.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so what he's going to do now is he's going to use examples from the Holocaust to help kind of make this point with regard to pain and suffering.
He's going to take the easy example.
Yeah, right. And so he says the 20th century was the bloodiest in history, right? Millions. Some people say 100 million or so people died during the 20th century as a result of all these evil people, godless people, right? The Holocaust, he says, which nearly wiped out Europe's Jewish population, serves, he tells us, as a testament to the depths of depravity to which humanity has stooped. Yet some distinctive Christian responses to those heart-wrenching atrocities typified, by the Nazis do not involve shows of force or retribution. So that's what we would think, right? Let's fight back. Let's, pay them back. Let's get after them and that sort of thing. He says, no, some of the responses don't show this. Rather, believers obtain an exceptional brand of strength through weakness and humble dependence on the transforming grace of Christ's gospel. Right. So he wants to consider three ways in which this distinctive brand of grace that we saw during the Holocaust was exemplified at this time. And so he's going to give us three examples of this.
Right. All right, so the first one is showing mercy to victims.
Showing mercies to victims.
Right. That makes sense. The first people that you think should have the
should
ability
have
to
mercy are the folks who,
are the ones who are hurt.
Yeah.
All right, so first, transforming grace was exemplified by showing mercy to victims of Nazi terror. A forgotten village in France named Le Chambron was populated by Huguenots, Reformed Protestant Christians, tracing their roots to the 16th century Reformation. The villagers were led by their pastor, André Trachme, who organized a rescue operation to hide and save thousands of Jewish children and adults. They did this while eluding the watchful eye of the local Nazi SS and their collaborators in the Vichy government. The whole village risked annihilation if their plot was discovered. But why? I mean, why rescue Jewish people?
Especially when you're already safe. They're not after you.
Yeah,
there's no good reason to do this. You're out of the deal. You're protected.
Right.
And yet you're going out and helping these people. You're showing grace. Why in the world would you do that?
Right.
And so this is his first example of grace in the Holocaust, right? Mm-hmm. This ability by grace to put your own self in their position. In fact, literally, if you're caught, you would be in their position, right? And do what you can to help these people who are suffering.
Right. And these aren't their neighbors. They're not their family. They're not people that they're extolling money from. They're doing this because of what their faith is telling them. This is a wrong thing happening to a persecuted people, and we have the joy of knowing that this life isn't the end of it. And if we can give our life for another, that's exemplifying what Christ did on the cross. Even to people that hated him, he forgave them on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's a saying that's said over not just the elect or the disciples only. It's said over the Romans. It's said over the Jewish leaders that have hounded him for all these years. And so through that example, we can see an example here in Les Chambon.
Yeah. All right, so that's the first one, right? Showing mercy to victims. The second one, he tells us, is victims bearing up under God's mercy, right? That's the second kind of grace here that we see in the Holocaust, God's grace with his people. So he said the second one is more excruciating, but it shows the transforming grace was exemplified through the Holocaust. How? It involved the reception of divine mercy while bearing up under unearthly suffering. Right? It produced that same distinctive brand of transforming grace. So this is a grace that transforms, is the point that he's trying to make here. It transforms us into saying, I'm going to do more than just protect myself. I'm going to reach out to those who are hurt, harmed, victims, even though it might mean I become part of that, and I'm vulnerable to that. Secondly, it transforms me this grace transforms me in terms of allowing me to endure whatever I have to go through for the name of Christ, right? He says that Huguenots in Chambon would have found kindred spirits among the Ten Boom family of Haarlem, a principal city in the Netherlands. They too, that is the Ten Boom family, were devout Christians risking their lives during the war to hide Jews in their homes. So they were doing the same thing that these folks in this Christian folks in this town were doing. But notice, unfortunately, they got caught, right? And were arrested and were sent to various Nazi concentration camps where most of the family members literally died, right?
Right. Yeah, and this is seen in the book, and there's a movie made, the Hiding Place, and it shows being in the concentration camp with the Jewish believers, the people who are of the Jewish ethnicity and religion as well, and having to deal with, well, why does God place us here? Well, one of the reasons that her family talk about is I was placed here to tell you about the gospel. And so, that's one of those things where we have to realize, for us, the story would end with a tunnel dug underneath the camp, and then it escapes with the tunnel falling on the Nazi guards
who are trying to chase after him,
and we all go into a field of lilies and spin around and sing. Well, that's the nice story, but again, what is the ultimate goal in life? The goal in life is not to make it out the other end alive. It's to glorify God in all that we do, and again, it's placing that correct perspective of what is the story of history about? And so in this great deal of suffering and evil, we see people speaking up and saying, this is antithetical to who God is. Repent and believe. And also, you also will one day die, person, whoever you are. Repent and believe. The message is true for all the people within the scope of these three areas where Christensen is covering here. So the story is told by Corrie ten Boom in her gripping memoir, The Hiding Place. It is one thing to extend mercy to the helpless and afflicted. It is quite another when you are afflicted severely with no one to offer help of any kind. Again, putting herself and her family in a camp not surrounded by, family or, a close family, Christians. These are people that you try to help, and now you're kind of facing look, where is your God now? My God and your God should be the same thing. The gospel message is able to be preached there as well. And so sometimes Christians are driven into the spiritual wilderness where they are alone, battered by hot winds of despair and deprived of any means of sustenance. Sometimes they are driven in the hands of literal devils where they are enslaved, beaten, starved, exposed to undiluted evil. Such was the case for Corrie ten and her sister Betsy.
Yeah.
And what does this sound like? Jesus going out into the wilderness, Jesus being tempted, Jesus being without food, Jesus being starved, being without friends, without protection. And these people saw the story in the Gospels and said, by suffering like Christ, as Christ suffered for us, we can have a small portion of that suffering. And so, Christians are more likely to be the ones to go out into the world and suffer in that same way. And it could be, again, like the early Christians, who are the ones that first saved the undesirable babies. It was the Christians going out to the side of the mountains or to the garbage heaps, rescuing Roman citizens, and then they grew up and became Roman citizens and all the legal issues that came about, and then able to hold office while being raised by Christian, becoming Christian, and probably having influence over Constantine and stopping the persecution in that fashion.
Yeah.
And so through those sacrifices, through that danger of stealing children or hiding Jews or going into the concentration camps, we see Christians having this understanding of Christ suffered for us. He told us to be an example like he was in all things, and this is one of the ways that we can do. We don't have to actively, walk in the fire and
even though they almost did, right?
It's not like they went up to the concentration camp guards and said, arrest me. They tried to hide, but once they're in the circumstances they're in, they glorify God in the best way they could. And This was one of those ways.
Exactly. So grace overcoming evil, right? It overcomes evil by, we see people helping victims. It overcomes evil by, victims bearing up under this tremendous, especially during the time of the Holocaust, this tremendous evil, right? The perseverance of the saints under the worst of conditions is Christianity, Christian tells us, greatest living proof, where its apologetic metal via its faithful adherences, right, those who continue to live for the gospel, is tested by fire and found to be more precious than gold. Mm-hmm. This tenacious life of suffering will eventually result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ, Peter tells us in 1 Peter 1. Yet it's not the Christian as he is in himself, but Christ in you, the hope of glory, Paul tells us in Colossians 1. So when people see the followers of Christ live this way, can they deny the living God? Christensen asked us. Can they deny the wealth of sovereign as the source of the riches of this unearthly grace? Can they deny that such grace incarnate in the lives of battered saints supremely magnifies God's glory in the face of evil as nothing can? Right. And obviously these are rhetorical, but the answer is, of course not. They can't deny it.
Right. Yeah. At the height of the Reformation, you have Calvin and him being in Geneva and setting up this kind of sanctuary city where, hopefully Rome doesn't touch. And so what happens? Well, you have the walls go up. You have the arms being drawn and quartered. You have, people looking through their peepholes. Actually, no. What you have is Calvin and the leaders of the churches training men to go into Rome to be persecuted and captured and found and burned at the stake, and also proclaiming the gospel to anyone who will hear. And so, again, there's no shying away from the evil in the world, but the priority of it changes when you realize And again, these are the crazy Calvinists who believe in this elect number of people. Why are they going? God will save whoever he wills. He will do it, not you. No, they viewed the gospel message as we are taking part in that. And yes, absolutely, God will use those things. But if God will use me burning at the stake to tell the gospel to the king or to the pope or to the priests, those people will hear the gospel and respond either in how they're directed to through God's power or through the condemnation that they hear from the true gospel message.
Yeah, and so we see here then that grace is indeed overcomes evil, right? Through the protection of the victims, through being a victim and yet living victorious, as we saw Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy, right? Even though her sister died through this process, right? Still, she glorified God. She brought people into the kingdom. And she was a tremendous witness and encouragement to Corrie, as we find out in the book and the movie. Right?
Yeah, and it's not one where it's laughter. It's not one that's not devoid of pain and suffering and heartache. That's there. Corrie ten Boom talks about wanting her sister back and missing her. It's not this kind of on lithium type response that we just jump into the snake pit, into the lava, and we do a Peter of Lord, let me come out onto the water with you. Let me come out into the lava. There were people that did that for being persecuted in Rome, and I would say incorrectly done. We don't need to throw our own heads into the lion's mouth. That will happen regardless, but. That might have been one of the ways that they were called. There might be somebody who comes to saving faith for that, and that's the purpose of our lives, is to be that emissary, that mouthpiece for God. It's what Adam was supposed to do. It's what Abraham was supposed to do. It's what the temple tent was supposed to do. It's what the temple and the Jewish people were supposed to do. It's what Jesus did. And it's what the church's main role is to be the body, to go out, to be the hands, to be the feet, to be the arm, to be the person that gives water or visits in jail or helps the poor or sick or develops typhoid and have to develop a remedy for it, or malaria, or going into an unknown part of the world without language and finding a way to preach the gospel to those people too, because that's what the gospel message is.
Yeah. So let's end this section by this quote that Corrie ten Boom says with regard to her sister Betsy, who was now dying. They're in the concentration camp. She's going to die. And it says here in page 445, medical help didn't come soon enough as she was laid on a stretcher, headed to the hospital, freezing, unable to move, no strength left. At death's doorstep, she achingly whispered to Corrie, "Must tell people what we have learned here. We must tell them that," and here it is, "there is no pit so deep that he is not deeper still." Right? That is grace under evil. Right? All right.
Okay. One more episode this further. So we've all right, in the Holocaust. Okay, so we've covered the victims, right? Check. We've covered the people that go to the victims. Well, who is left among the people that we're going to cover?
Yeah.
So I guess you're going to have to come back and find out next time as we finish up the book, What About Evil by Scott Christensen. Again, thank you for watching it on YouTube or on the various audio platforms. We on YouTube and Odyssey, we put out short clips for the episode. So if you're looking to share a short thing or wanting to watch this episode in shorter clips, that's done there. And so we thank you for sharing those out and watching them. And last week was amazing. We had J. Warner Wallace share one of our episodes from this book on Does God Have Emotions? And so we welcome any new watchers or listeners out there as well. So join us next time as we finish up the book, and you can say you've read a lengthy book for the year and check it off your list as before we pull open another one. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.